Hello and good morning. Welcome to TSK F1. My name's Rich and this is your daily dose of Formula One news. Just checking that I'm still live and everything says I'm making noise. So welcome to the show. Welcome to another week, and it's race week. We have Jeddah this week. Super excited for that. And also, I will be here for every session of the Jeddah race weekend. All three practices, the qualifying and the race, I will be live with my watch-alongs, so really hope you can join me. Please do make sure you hit that subscribe button down below and also the bell button so that you get notified when I go live for those. But this week, guys, well, today, what we're going to be talking about is Valtteri Bottas and his freedom while he's at Alfa Romeo. Fernando Alonso talking about this year's Aston Martin car, its strengths and weaknesses, and also problems at Red Bull. Now, I have had to do a bit of digging this morning, and I've had to translate a page from German to try and get some quotes here, because I found a little bit of a story and I started chasing it to its source, and I found some quotes that are from a German publication by Helmut Marko, and they're interesting. They're interesting, I think. So without further ado, let's get into it. Please do make sure you've hit that like. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Really appreciate it. First of all, we will talk about Bottas. I think everyone likes a bit of Bottas, really. I think he's a good guy. I think he's a good racer. I think he's very talented. And he's been talking about how life is different in Alfa Romeo for him, and that he has different levels of freedom. And for example, him coming back from the off-season break over Christmas and New Year with his mullet and his tash, and he says he feels like he wouldn't have been allowed to have his mullet or be who he is at Mercedes because they have company policies. And he says, I think the company policies are a little different in different workplaces. Let's put it this way. And some things are maybe a little bit more restricted. I think now I feel I can really be who I am. And yes, certainly there is a little difference. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think that's the perception I've always had of Mercedes from the outside. I don't know about you guys. I've always felt like Mercedes look really corporate, really image driven. You know, I don't know how you would put it. I don't know. Straight. Do you know what I mean? Like, just this is the corporate image. This is the image we want to portray. We want to portray an exacting, clinical sort of image. And I suppose Valtteri Bottas showing up with a mullet and a tash might not adhere to that. Standards maybe, but is it a lack of standards if he turns up with a mullet? It's just a haircut, right? Because some may say, in my previous job, me appearing with a big beard and a shaved head, you know, but in a shirt and tie, is that a lack of standards? I don't know. It's just a haircut and it's just facial hair. But they have a very clean cut. That's probably what I'd go for. Clean-cut image, don't they, Mercedes? And I think you'd say that about them. We've said it kind of versus Red Bull. That's the exact reason why, if Lando Norris was going to go somewhere, I'd see him at Red Bull, because I feel like how he is would go well with Red Bull. Lewis is quite flamboyant, though. I suppose it depends, doesn't it? Lewis is flamboyant in his own time or wearing his designer clothes when he arrives at the circuit, which I would say isn't strictly on Mercedes time. You know what I mean? You know, when he's in his Mercedes gear, his haircut isn't anything crazy. His facial hair isn't anything crazy by societal norms, I mean, you know. But then, okay, he goes to fashion shows and things like that in his own time. But to me, there's a difference there, isn't there? You know, you've got your own time and you've got your I am representing Mercedes time. But it's just an interesting thing that, to be fair, Bottas isn't saying this as as a bad thing. He's just saying it's different and that different places have different policies. And I can say from my own personal life, working in different places, there's different expectations, isn't there? From one company to another, they have different ways of working and what they expect of you. And I think, to be fair, maybe, like you just said there, Tara, maybe Lewis gets some leeway. I think Bottas would enjoy that Alfa Romeo as well, because he's a really good driver for them, isn't he? He's a top draw driver, and he could be allowed some freedoms. But I just thought that was an interesting thing, because it kind of conforms to thoughts I had about Mercedes prior. Not that it's a bad thing, it's just the way they are. And the second thing I was going to speak about today is Aston Martin and Aston Martin and Alfa Romeo, Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso. Because there have been more quotes coming out about the Aston Martin and what we should expect to see. And I've seen some this morning from Alonso, which are very mature and thinking about things in a very level-headed way. He's not getting carried away with what's happened in Bahrain. And he said, I have the same feeling from testing, like it's too good to be true, and you're always expecting that you'll go a step back and you'll get back to reality. But it seems real, the performance. Let's see in Jeddah. I'm curious to go to Jeddah and Australia, very different circuits, high-speed corners, very little tyre degradation. And that is a very important bit, isn't it? Because the Red Bull and the Aston Martin looked particularly strong because of the tyre degradation Ferrari and Mercedes were suffering. And they've both been open about that. It was better for the the Aston Martin, right? So as we move forward into Jeddah, Mercedes might actually move forward ahead of Alonso's Aston Martin and also Stroll's, to be fair, because he'll have recovered a lot more by now, won't he? We might see the Mercedes in front, potentially, of the Aston Martin, because one of the reasons they moved back was the tyre degradation, but also Mercedes was struggling with the downforce in general. Now, Jeddah is high downforce, well, it's sort of downforce fast corners, right? So I think the effect of the Mercedes will be minimal, because I think what they'll gain in tyre wear, they'll lose in their lack of efficiency with downforce. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens going into the next race, because I think it's becoming more and more obvious that the tyres are going to make a huge difference, aren't they? But Bahrain is one of the most tyre dependent tracks of the entire season. So is it going to allow Mercedes and Ferrari to be closer? I don't know. I hope so, because I don't think we want to see the Red Bulls just clear off 40 seconds up the road again. Even if you're a Red Bull fan, a season of that, I mean, it's a little bit boring. And yes, I used to say this when Lewis was in front as well. So I'm hoping the lack of tyre degradation will just bunch that front of the grid up. I still think Red Bull are going to run away with it. I think they've got so much in hand, even if there's less of a tyre deg sort of comparison. I think they're still much, much faster. But I think Aston Martin's advantage, it seemed very, very big, but I think they might be pegged back a little bit, and you might see a Ferrari and Mercedes faster. But it'll be interesting to see in qualifying and the race whether Ferrari can maintain their pace, right? Because I think as fans we kind of need Ferrari to get their qualifying pace into race pace and have them figure that out, and maybe have Mercedes take a step. And I hope the Aston Martin pace is real, and that they take it to the other teams. But you could see them kind of move back. EJ saying, I can't see Red Bull losing many, if any. And Terra saying, Bahrain suits fast cars, Jeddah suits quick cars. Yeah, but it's about the tyres. It's different. The tyres are going to be treated extremely differently in Jeddah compared to Bahrain. And I'd love to know your thoughts. Do you think the other teams are going to get closer to Red Bull and Aston Martin because of that? We saw really that in the corners, the Red Bull was super fast, but down the straights, it was the Ferrari in the mini sectors and Aston Martin in a couple of them. And Mercedes were nowhere on any of them. But Aston and Merckx fight it out all season. I don't know. Really, I really don't know. As I can't call it yet. I think like Alonso says, we're going to see much more after the first 3 races, aren't we? Because Bahrain, Jeddah, and Australia, they're all very different circuits. So it's going to be interesting to see. Mousy says, I think Mercedes will be a bit better here as Lewis did have the highest top speed in speed trap, but not much better. Yeah, but that's the problem they've got, Mousy. They're saying that the Mercedes is now decent in a straight line, but it can't go around corners effectively compared to a Red Bull sort of thing, I think we can hope for a 4-way fight in Jeddah with Ferrari and Merck becoming more relevant. I hope so. Or even if the Red Bulls pull away, which I expect them to, that maybe that gap is smaller between the Ferraris, Mercedes, and Aston Martins. And all 3 teams have got drivers capable of a good battle with each other. So it could be great to see. If this is what happens with this season, I really hope we see a lot more of Fernando versus Lewis. Because what we saw in Bahrain from their I'll say it again, I said it last week, it was like mature, classy driving between both of them. It was really, really good. No elbows out pushing you off the track. It was just classy, accepting when a move was done, but also it was just really, really good. And I hope we see a lot more of that type of driving. But just to remind everyone, I will be here for every session watching along, so please do make sure you've hit that subscribe button and the bell notification button so you get notified when I go live with the watch-alongs. I'll be doing the practice sessions, the qualifying, and the race, so please do make sure you have subscribed. But there we are. That's sort of the news there. Now, I will be doing a race. Be doing a race preview later in the week as well. Now, this is the main talking point today. I'll move my camera over here. Helmut Marko. Now, I got some quotes from one website, but then I went and chased the source, which was a German publication called Speed Week, which I also have learned is part of the Red Bull Media Group, which is interesting that these quotes are on here. Now, there are some extra ones, which I'm going to read first, but it's about potential sort of issues behind the scenes at Red Bull. Okay, now, a little tidbit of information. I don't think I'd read this. I don't think I've read this before. But Helmut Marko was asked about how much who approached who with regards to Ford. And this story isn't about Ford. It was just one of the questions. And he said the negotiations were conducted personally by Ford president Bill Ford and CEO Jim Farley, with Christian Horner and Helmut Marko supported Horner within those negotiations, but it was Horner's gig, basically. And how much technology will come from Ford, he was asked, and he said, even if the team may be called Red Bull Ford or Ford Red Bull, the drive will come solely from Red Bull powertrains. Ford will be involved in the battery technology. So that's how it's going to work with Red Bull Ford. The engine, in essence, really is going to be an evolution of what Honda, the intellectual property Red Bull powertrains got from Honda, but it's going to be a Red Bull powertrains in 2026, isn't it? And then it's going to be Ford in the battery technology. Now, this isn't unprecedented. We've seen this. Williams have done a lot of battery and electrical technology, as have McLaren, actually, for other teams. So this isn't unprecedented, and that's how it's Red Bull Ford. Ford. So it's going to be a Red Bull powertrain with a Ford battery, basically, and all of that situation. Now, these are the interesting comments. I'm not making something out of nothing here. I feel like, from what I've seen of Helmut Marko, he's an extremely strong-willed individual, and when he's got thoughts or when he has an opinion, that is it, And the question was, instead of reporting to Red Bull boss Dietrich Mateschitz, who died in October, you're now reporting to newly installed CEO Oliver Mintzlaff. How's the collaboration going? And he said, we've met twice. He's got insights. It remains to be seen how far he will respond to our ideas. Red Bull Racing has always been very independent. And he says, then he was asked, something personal. How has working in the team changed for you since Dietrich Mateschitz passed away? He said, it's no longer the case that I report by phone after every practice session and race. The direct, personal and friendly relationship is no longer there. Dietrich Mateschitz, was a visionary, had emotions. I don't see that anymore. And then he was asked, you said before that you have a contract, but work on a handshake basis as long as you're happy. And he says, I'm a free person. I can stop at any time if I'm no longer happy. Wait and see how the future turns out. Now, I mean, that is very matter of fact, but it's hardly covering the new situation in glory and happiness, is it? It's not like a corporate reaction where he's saying everything's fine. We're just having to deal with the loss of, Dietrich Mateschitz, and we're carrying on under the new working conditions and stuff like that. Apparently, as well, as part of this, the new sort of boss doesn't have an affinity with motorsport at all. And I believe another one of his responsibilities is that he is CEO or director at Red Bull Leipzig, one of Red Bull's football teams. And it's just an interesting thing, because to me, I don't know about you guys, I've always seen Helmut Marko like Niki Lauda at Mercedes, but less formal, right? So Niki Lauda was clearly a big part of Mercedes on a formal sort of basis. He was there. He was a big part of it. And what was his title? I think it was something like executive director or something. I've forgotten what his title was, but it was a very formal thing. Whereas the reality with Helmut Marko is there is no contract. There is no contract. It's informal, and the reason, the reason he's there is because Dietrich Mateschitz had a massive love for Jochen Rindt, and Helmut Marko was his friend. So he met Helmut Marko at a hill climb when Helmut Marko was still competing. They became friends, and he always used to report to Dietrich Mateschitz as a friend rather than an employee. And Helmut Marko had basically complete control over Red Bull Juniors and the general direction of the entire team. And this is the kind of thing that can derail a team, I think. While from the outside, Niki Lauda was Niki Lauda, a legend of the sport, but I do think it had what can you say? Waves, ripples. It had an effect. Sorry, guys. It had waves throughout the team at Mercedes when Niki Lauda passed. And Helmut Marko is that kind of guy there at Red Bull, but he's very outspoken, and he strikes me as the type of guy that if it's over, it won't be a clean, like, I'm bowing out, guys. I feel like he'd make noise. And you guys can give me your opinion on that, but you can, I think it'd make noise. If it came to an end, I don't think it'd be good for Red Bull. I think it would be disruptive to what they have going on. And I'd love your opinion on that, because that's just my own... He speaks his mind, doesn't he? And we've called him all kinds of things on this channel, because normally what he says is nonsense, but this is more of a personal situation because he has lost a close personal friend, and it's something he's built up over time, the Red Bull F1 team, and he's used to being autonomous. And look, I've worked with people who have been used to a level of autonomy before, and sometimes they really don't react well to not getting that anymore. And I could see Helmut Marko being that kind of person, good or bad, that he looks at it and goes, I don't want this. I don't want this anymore, I don't think it was too formal, Lauda, for me. Lauda knew what he was doing. Marko tends to more stab in the dark. Well, it's one of those, isn't it? I think, how can I put it? Lauda just... He just seemed... Well, it was more formal than a handshake and no contract, Lewis. That's kind of what I mean. Nick says, when Lauda spoke, you listen. Best way to describe is like Alex Ferguson at Man United. When he says something, you listen. I suppose that's not a bad shout. John saying, yeah, I agree, 100. Haha. He'd have a few things to say which perhaps haven't been said before. Yeah, I probably agree. Tara says, with no contract, the only reason for him to go would be over falling out or a lack of goodwill. But this is what I'm saying. Tara. These quotes... he says what he means, and he's not saying he's going anywhere, but he's saying that there was emotion and Mateschitz was a visionary, and there's none of that anymore. There's no direct personal or friendly relationship anymore with the new guy. There's nothing there on that level anymore. And if Red Bull Group decide they want to, shall we say, meddle in something that Marko has been autonomous in, then maybe he just won't go for it, At times I feel Marko runs his mouth slightly, and while still highly respected, people take what he says with a pinch of salt. I do. I do feel this is slightly different, though, because normally, he'll say something that's overtly controversial to annoy Mercedes or to annoy Ferrari or to get in the mind of another driver. I can't help but feel this is slightly different because this is Mateschitz, an actual friend that passed away, and it could be the changing of how Red Bull works. Now, if this happens, it'd be very interesting to see how Red Bull, the Formula One team, would change, because you'd have to think if Helmut Marko was to go, it would be because of that loss of freedom of decision-making. So how would Red Bull Group affect the F1 team? I mean, if I was in charge of Red Bull Group, I'd want to meet Helmut Marko. I'd want to meet Adrian Newey and Christian Horner and people like that and say, look, I want to be hands-off. Come to me if you've got big issues that you require me for, but I'm not going to try and fix what isn't broken here. But we know how corporate entities can be, and there may well be something that Red Bull feel like they need to get a hold of. But again, the other side of this is that the new chap, Oliver Mintzlaff, he doesn't particularly care about motorsport, and that's rubbing off on sort of Helmut Marko and the higher ups, that he has no affinity for it and doesn't care particularly. And that's a whole other angle, isn't it? That's a whole other angle. It is Red Bull, Formula One team. If someone who's controlling the money decides we're not bothered anymore, they're not bothered anymore. Who actually pays for helmet then? Expensive, etc. I think Red Bull do, But well, you've got a good shout there, John. You've got a good shout. Is it within the cost cap? I don't know. You know, for me, I'd be looking at what Marko does, as does Red Bull need Horner and Marko. Is there money to be saved removing one manager? The one that seems to do less. I think he's more overarching. Like I said, Helmut Marko has always. It's a difficult thing to explain, Lewis. So you've obviously got Christian Horner, who is the team principal. I'm not sure what title they use at Red Bull, but Helmut Marko is more of an overarching, big picture Red Bull Racing situation where he controls the direction of the team. He controls Red Bull Juniors. He control is more of a this is what we should be doing kind of dude. I think, you know, it's a difficult one to explain because it was kind of like, again, like Niki Lauda at Mercedes. Toto Wolff was in charge, but when Niki Lauda spoke to Toto Wolff, he's one of the guys that Toto Wolff would stop, listen, and take on board. You know, aren't they selling off the sister team? No, Chris, that was just. Is the word hyperbole? I'm not sure. Media. Basically, what's happening there is the Red Bull Group are looking at bringing AlphaTauri and Red Bull under the same roof because they have the design offices over in Italy, but then the engine stuff over in England, and it doesn't make any sense, and it costs them extra, so they can bring them all onto one site, and it'd work better. That's what they're actually looking at doing, rather than so technically potentially selling off the site in Italy, but not selling the team off. It's more about more effective, efficient working. And not such a disconnect between the different parts of the team. But yeah, I just thought it was an interesting thing to bring you guys because normally stuff Helmut Marko says is like an outward thing, isn't it? To the other teams, it's always controversial. It's always cheers, Chris, thanks. It's always controversial. It's always outward. And this is the first time I've seen him inwardly saying, you know, there is no relationship there. And I'll decide if I'm happy or not. We'll see what the rest of the season brings. But I still do think if Helmut Marko was to leave the team, it would have a big effect on Red Bull. I don't think it would be a bump-free ride. Now, they might be dominant enough this season that it's not really noticed, but I really do think it would have an effect on the Red Bull team if he were to leave. But there we are. Plenty of people have shared their opinions on him and what they think. Looking at Marko's history, his main success is Max, and that's it, as his driver selection evolution as a complete failure. I mean, I think, has it? Who regards it as a failure? Do people regard it as a failure? That's the first I've ever read of Red Bull Academy project being deemed a failure. I don't think you could really deem it a failure. They've made plenty of drivers. Personally, I'm not about that. To be fair, Lewis, they've made plenty of drivers, and not all Formula One drivers. They've done lots. They've done lots, I think. But there we have it. There's the news for today. Just a little reminder again, I will be live for the watch-alongs at the at the end of the week for all the practice sessions and for qualifying and the race. And I will, of course, be live for every morning, 9 a.m, with the latest F1 news. Thanks so much for joining me, guys. Please do make sure you've hit that subscribe button down below and the bell notification button so you get notified whenever I go live or post content. And I will see you in the morning, 9 a.m. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll see you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.